right, are we ready? Is everybody ready to? Okay, I am going to call to order our finance bond workshop. And Dr. Ross, I am going to let you start us off, or ask you to start us off,
All right.
please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board and our community. We're thankful to have the opportunity to hear from Jay Glover of PFM and from Franny Hauser of Reforma. So we're going to ask at this time that Madison Paul begin opening up our bond workshop.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ross. Good afternoon, board members. Chairman Hines, welcome back. So yes, today we have Jay Glover. He is online with us. So again, he is our financial advisor from PFM. And then we also have Franny Heiser from Burr Foreman. She is our bond counsel. So they're going to really lead this workshop. They're going to alternate between some of the slides, but I think I'll let Jay go ahead and get us started.
Hello, this is Jay Glover from PFM. I think I was just prompted. I apologize in advance, and thank you for allowing me to do this presentation virtually. We had a long scheduled family vacation I'm on, but I'm glad to participate here. And I think Franny is actually going to do the first few slides of the presentation, and we're going to flip back and forth between the two of us as we walk through sort of the existing debt and then talk about some things as we move forward. So I think I see Franny standing there ready to go, so I'll defer to her to start the presentation off.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be with y'all. As has been said, my name is Franny Heiser. And just a word or two, I've been working with school districts for 30 plus years. I generally limit my practice to helping school districts borrow money, and very delighted to be able to have had a long-time relationship with this school district. And we appreciate y'all giving us some time today to go over with you sort of your existing debt profile and what debt you have now, and then maybe open up the possibility for y'all's consideration or discussion, talk about what might be next in terms of your ability to meet your capital needs. So the long-term debt for school districts can only borrow money in certain very limited ways, and issuing long-term debt to use for your capital projects is generally the way that you would meet your capital needs. General obligation bonds are bonds that are secured by the full faith, credit, and taxing power of the school district, meaning that they are backed by taxes that are levied and collected on personal and real property. Under the South Carolina Constitution, a school district, like any other political subdivision, so a city, county, school district, can issue an amount up to 8% of the assessed value of all taxable property in the school district. We call that the 8% debt limit. Sometimes you might hear that called your constitutional debt limit, and that basically is your credit limit. That's what you as a board of trustees or school board can decide to borrow without having to have voter approval. If your needs exceed what you can pay for from your 8% debt limit, you would generally look at a referendum. A referendum is an effort to go to your voters and ask your voters to approve issuing debt in an amount above your constitutional debt limit. Now, as you'll see from the numbers, y'all got a huge assessed value. Your 8% of your assessed value is at $46 million. And you would say, well, man, that's a lot of money. But when a new high school might cost you $70 or $80 million, a new elementary school could be in the $30 to $40 million range, maybe even a little bit higher. You can see that your 8% debt limit is really valuable to you for your annual needs, so that you would borrow some on an annual basis to meet your capital needs. But 8% is generally not going to be enough to meet your long-term capital needs. So the companion piece to the 8%, to any GO, not just 8%, but referendum-approved debt or your 8% debt, the companion to that is your debt service millage. When GO debt is issued, the county auditor and the county treasurer levy and collect sufficient amounts through debt service millage to pay principal and interest on the bonds as they become due. Your 8% capacity does change over time. Generally speaking, it's going to grow in a school district that is experiencing growth on an annual basis or during your the reassessment every 4 or 5 years. Your assessed value is going to be higher, so you'll have more 8% debt limit. As 8% debt is retired or paid off, you recapture that amount. And then if new debt is issued, it's going to count against your 8% debt limit. So when in the next couple of slides, I think Jay is going to talk to y'all about the amount of debt you have outstanding and what the opportunities are. But just wanted to sort of make sure that we're clear on 8% on general obligation debt and how debt service millage fits into that. It was, I think, last year that the school board voted to have a target debt service millage of 69.5 mils. It is that amount of millage can go up or down. It's based on decisions made by this board. But the 6.9 mils, I think Jay's going to show you, will give y'all some flexibility and some options going forward to meet your capital debt needs. That's just a real brief introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Jay, but I'm going to stand here because I am the clicker person. Here we go.
Perfect. Thanks, Franny. And again, I apologize for being virtual. So if you all have a question for me in the midst of this, please don't hesitate to ask. Franny's given sort of a brief overview of the details of how school districts in the state of South Carolina issue debt. We're going to talk a little bit more about the district's actual debt that's outstanding as we sit here today. So as you can see on this table, the district has 5 financings outstanding that total about $145 million of outstanding par amount. Of that amount, about 24.1 million is subject, or excuse me, 22.8 million is subject to the 8% debt limit. And that's really the 2022 bonds that some of you will recall we issued last year to finance a portion of the Irmo High School project. So we actually issued that on a long-term basis with a final maturity in 2031, but we paid down 24 million of that in this year. As of March 1 of 2023, we actually paid down 24.1 million of that principal. And what that has done is it's allowed us to regenerate that 8% debt capacity. So as we sit here today, Franny mentioned your 8% capacity in total is about $47 million. Of that, we've issued about $22 million. So you have about $24 million of 8% capacity. We are proposing that in May of this year, the district would actually issue that full amount of 24.1 million to max out your 8% debt capacity, as you see here in the lower bullet. And that will be for the $15 million of annual maintenance projects that you all undertake each year, as well as an additional $9.1 million for Irmo High School. For those of you that were on the board previously, you'll recall we had planned to finance the Irmo High School project over a 3-year period, really given your 8% debt limitation. So this will be the second of 3 financings to fund the Irmo High School project that's being undertaken now. Franny, if you skip to page 5, this just pictorially shows what your annual debt service is as of today, but also layers in the proposed issuance of the Series 2023 bonds. So if I can just, the gray bars that are shown here is your outstanding referendum-approved debt service. The red bar is the 2022 financing that I just mentioned that's outstanding. And then... Hey, Jay, Charlie. Sorry, I was having a bit of a technical difficulty, so I apologize for that. The red bar is the 2022 GO financing, and the yellow bar is the proposed 24 million that we're going to issue this year in 2023. You can see we're proposing to pay that off in 1 year. All of it's going to be paid off in March of 2024. And you might ask, why is the yellow bar extending beyond your debt service millage target? And that's because we plan to use $5 million of your sinking fund monies to actually help pay down that in March of 2024. So this is what your debt service will look like after the proposed issuance of your 2023 bonds. And while this is important as we move forward, you'll see there is significant amount of capacity underneath your 69.5 mil millage levy to add on referendum debt in the future if you so choose to do so. So it's very important to show this graph because it really does provide you some flexibility to take on additional debt in the future without having to raise your millage rate. Raising your millage rate will generate additional capacity, but you even have capacity within your current millage rate. If you want to slip to the next slide, Franny. Okay, so that was sort of a pictorial snapshot of where your existing debt is and a brief explanation of your proposed 2023 bonds that we'll ask you to consider at a subsequent board meeting. When we look at issuing those bonds, we really look at two different ways to issue those bonds. One is through a standalone public offering or direct placement bank loan. So that's when the school district is actually the issuer of the bonds. And that gives you complete flexibility as to when you can issue those bonds because you have to do that at your own discretion. And the key part here is those bonds can also have a final maturity longer than 1 year. So anytime you're going to issue bonds with a maturity longer than 1 year, you're really going to do it on a standalone basis with the district being the issuer. The other option we consider each year is actually issuing through SCAGO, which is a pooled program that allows you to create some economies of scale by combining issuances with other school districts in the state of South Carolina. The one caveat with the SCAGO program is they only issue bonds with a 1-year maturity that actually mature each March 1st. So if you have a longer term bond program, for instance, with your referendum debt with a longer payback, the SCAGO program is not really an option. Some other elements of the SCAGO program, the bond proceeds and the debt service for each district are held by your local county treasurer. So there's no difference between that and your standalone bond program. And there's no what we call cross default. So if another district that was involved in the program did not levy enough millage to cover their debt service, all of the other issuers are not responsible for that debt service. So that's a key feature. You don't want to have any risk exposure to any other districts in the state of South Carolina. As I mentioned before, it also allows you to pool with other borrowers to create economies of scale in terms of the issuance costs, which can be a benefit to you all. And again, I mentioned this before, there's 2 issuances a year, and both of those mature on March 1 of the following year. So you don't have complete flexibility in terms of timing when you go through the SCAGO program. I will mention here that if there's more details warranted on the SCAGO program, I think Franny has a complete presentation she can walk through at your discretion as part of this meeting. We'd also thought it was very important to point out the timing associated with the proposed 2023 bond issue that we just talked about. Again, the $24 million that will fund your annual maintenance and a portion of the Ormeau project. So the thought here was on March the 27th, we would bring the bond resolution to you all as a discussion item, so you can have any questions that you would like addressed. On April the 24th, we'd bring it back as an action item for your consideration, and then we'd be in a position to have the bond sale and lock the interest rates in May. And really, this time frame works whether you do a standalone financing or through the SCAGO program. So we still need to determine, based on feedback from you all, which one is the desired path, because the timing we've laid out really works for either of the programs. Now, Franny, I'll turn it back over to you. I think we're going to transition now from talking about your 8% debt to future referendum bonds and sort of how that might work in some scenarios as we are in the very early stages of discussions with that. This is all preliminary, but thought it would be helpful to you all to understand the process you would go through if a referendum was ever to be considered.
So we are covering a lot of material for y'all and with y'all this afternoon, and so there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards, and both Jay and will be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So moving from your annual 8% bond program to the potential for referendum bonds, we look at referendum bonds because you need more capital money than your 8% will provide you. The critical decisions to be made by you, the Board of Trustees, you first really need to identify your capital needs. Sometimes I've seen school boards start with how much can we afford, or how much will our taxpayers let us borrow. But I think that the best starting point is actually to identify what your needs are and let your needs drive the requests that you make in the referendum. As part of the process, Jay, your financial advisor, would work with you on what millage levels might look like if you borrowed $200 million, let's say. Right now here in this school district, you've got a 69.5 millage target, and you've seen from the chart earlier, the graph earlier on, that y'all actually have a good bit of room under your current target millage to pay for referendum debt. Your needs may be such that the millage needs to be a little bit higher. So again, that would be a decision that y'all would make. Maybe 69.5 mils doesn't provide everything you need, but maybe 75 mils would. So again, decision for y'all. The amount of bonds to be authorized, obviously, for y'all, the list of projects, what's going to be paid for from the referendum bond proceeds. Those are all decisions that the school board makes. Y'all also make decisions and have the flexibility to have a referendum as a special election. We have had success lately in the last several years for bond referenda on true general election days. That would mean November, even numbered years. You are not limited to that date. In order for your referendum, you could have a special election in the spring, you could have one in the fall. Again, y'all's decisions. We generally recommend that you have the referendum when school is in session, because your school families, your school stakeholders are your best advocates. They are the most important single factor in the success of a referendum. So you want to be able to have your referendum plans go forward while folks are still in school. So that gives you like a May or September, October, or any time during the winter. The steps that you would take to actually order a bond referendum would be adopting a resolution. In that resolution, you would have the amount, you would have the form of the question, and the form of the question is where the projects are identified and listed. And you would set the day and time for the referendum. We then would work with your local election commissions to have notices published and to have the election commissions run the referendum for y'all. We would do other notices that are required by law. Then you would, just the referendum's held. Hopefully it's successful. You certify the results, and you're in business to go forward with your capital program as approved by the voters. So, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
I'm kind of a loud person, my wife tells me, so.
The interest rates are fixed, and I'm going to toss that one over to Jay because he does your numbers. I do your written work, your legal work. Jay does your numbers, but the answer is yes.
So they don't
interest rates are
fluctuate
fixed
with the
for time.
Fed's rates?
Sir?
They don't fluctuate, that whatever there is a fixed rate, and we just determine the amount of time if we do a standalone?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Now, I will say that the suggestion for this year is that you do a one-year bond, that you have between the millage that has been the target millage and the excess that's in your sinking fund or debt service balance. Y'all can borrow the $24 million and repay it by March of next year. And we're making that recommendation because the 15 million is needed for your annual, and again, deferring to y'all, because y'all actually make the decisions, but the recommendation is 15 million for your annual needs and the balance for the second installment at Irma. And the idea of borrowing it and paying it within 1 year is you recapture that 8%, so you can do it again, and you pay the lowest possible interest cost because the bonds are only outstanding for a short period of time. Yes, sir.
So that means you're basically recommending the SCAGO bonds.
I would recommend that for y'all because I think that's where you're going to find your most efficiencies. You'll have the lower cost of issuance and you'll have the benefit of a publicly traded interest rate. But that's absolutely a decision for the board to make. Either way, y'all will be in good shape whether you go standalone or through SCAGO. Jay, did you want to say something about the interest rates?
Yeah, I don't know if the question was like what level of interest rates there were, but in terms of the interest rates, those are locked on the day that we actually borrow the funds. So once they're borrowed, if it's a 10-year financing, those bonds are generally locked for the 10-year period. So yeah, if there was a specific question about interest rates, I didn't catch that, but I can address that if there is.
I think the question was, are the interest rates fixed? And I think you just answered it, yes.
Yeah, no, they're definitely fixed. So on the date of issuance, they're locked in, and they're locked in for the term of the bonds. Whether interest rates rise or fall after that, there's no risk to the district.
And this next,
Ms. Tizer, right here.
yes, ma'am.
Real quick, while we were talking about the process of a referendum and when you would schedule that, you mentioned that we could do a special election for a referendum, but you would recommend holding it on the even years. With the special election, is there additional cost to the district for that? Do you know?
Yes,
And
the school district would be responsible. The school district would be responsible for the cost of opening the polling places, organizing or having the ballots put into the election, into the machine. So yes, the school district itself would pay the cost of a special election.
do you know what that generally ranges?
Y'all are, I'd prefer to get back to you with that, but I would say conservatively, you're probably looking at $25,000. It could be more than that, but y'all are a relatively small geographic area, so it might not need to be much more than that. But I'd be glad to check with the election commissions.
Okay, if we held it during a general election, is there a cost to the district for that, or is that just
No.
okay?
Nope. I will say that I always remind people that if you want to have the referendum on a general election day, and that's either even year or an odd year, so like this coming November of 23, the ballot question has to be delivered to your election commission by noon on August the 15th. Because it's a general election, the state election commission has so many different ballots that they have to manage that August the 15th deadline is statewide, and it is a hard deadline.
Real quick, Ms. Hauser, you had said earlier in your presentation that you see more success with referendums during November, even year elections. I guess, is there
Is there a why?
is there a why? Yeah.
I think that in special elections, meaning not on a general election day, if you have a organized group that opposes the referendum, they seem to have more energy and are more willing to come out to vote no than your supporters who are supportive, but they just don't seem to be quite as motivated to get out there and win the day for the school district. For a general election, you actually already have your pool of voters coming to the election, the polling place, so you don't need to drive or have a committee work to drive the voters to the polling places. And we've had, and I'd be happy to provide Dr. Ross with some numbers, but most school districts that go on election nights have been successful.
Dr. Ross, what's our preferred timeline on this? Does it fit the general election schedule, or?
Yeah, think of, kind of going back to Ms. Hauser said, we refer to you as Franny, if you don't mind. Well, Franny.
That's fine.
Well, not to be informal, but we have taken the opportunity of doing the 5-year, which would put the needs first in our question. And by doing that, I think we would miss any opportunity to make that hard deadline on August 15th. I think looking at 75 days to prepare the resolution, we would be rushing that. So I think the recommendation from the administration to the board would be to look at the 2024 November, and then we would then take our time to look at what these priorities are in our 5-year master plan. And I think that way, at that point, we would be able to fully capture all of those needs that are there. And we have until November 15th, or whenever that we've elected, or the board has voted, because at that point, we cannot use district resources to advocate for it, correct?
That is correct. The State Ethics Act provides that no public resources can be used to advocate for or against a referendum. The State Ethics Commission has an opinion that says until the vote has been taken to hold a referendum, the do's and don'ts do not kick in, because there is no referendum until you vote for it. So you've got more flexibility now to educate your public about your needs and do it with a very positive twist than you will have when we are strictly just the facts. So there are good reasons to not vote to have your referendum until you know what your needs are and you in fact are ready to go.
And that would give us a whole year that we can use our resources to share this with the public. And then when the board votes, that's when we go radio silent, so to speak.
You know, there's one more slide that we want to ask Jay to go over with y'all, because the numbers here may not meet all your needs, but I think it's a really good piece of information that what you can access with no additional millage on your taxpayers. Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Franny. And again, I want to emphasize here, and I'll say over and over again, these are very preliminary numbers. So, and we're using very conservative assumptions. So I don't want to lock these in your brain right now. I just want to give you an idea of where ranges are in terms of how much money you might be able to afford under different scenarios that we've talked about. As Dr. Ross just mentioned, fall 2024 might be the time that you're looking at, but we've also looked at scenarios for fall 2023. And this initial graph here shows if a referendum was done in fall of 2023 and you had no debt service millage increase, so you kept your debt service millage at 69.5 mils, we estimate you could afford about $180 million worth of referendum debt. And that debt would be issued in 2024, 2025, and 2026 in equal installments of $60 million. So again, this is very preliminary, but that gives you a range of where you're looking at in terms of no tax increase with a referendum in fall of 2023.
Mr. Glover?
Next, Annie.
Mr. Glover, can I ask you a question? Can you hear me?
Was it, if that was a question, could someone else repeat it, please?
Okay, my question is there a way for us to get this chart updated if we were to ask for a 24 referendum with no tax increase?
Yeah, so I think the question was no tax increase in 2024. That'll be actually the next slide after this one. So we actually have we have 4 different scenarios we're showing. If Franny can switch to page 9, this actually, again, shows a fall 2023 referendum with a 10 mil increase in debt service. So that would mean moving from 69.5 mils to 79.5 mils, which is about a $60 increase per year for a homeowner within the district. And as you can see here, that bumps up your capacity to about $280 million, or 2 installments of 90 million with 1 installment of 100 million, again being issued in 2024, 2025, and 2026. So those are your 2023 scenarios. If you flip to the next slide, we actually look at the 2024 referendum date with no tax increase. And by actually shifting it out a year, you can actually generate a little bit more funding while still keeping the same final maturity of 2039. And that seems a little bit odd, but the reason is your pinch point, so to speak, is in those first couple of years where you don't have capacity to pay interest at your current millage rate. So by pushing the debt service out to 2025, 2026, and 2027, you can actually get $194 million. So deferring it out a year actually increases your capacity somewhat in terms of a no tax increase scenario. And then the final one that we looked at would be the same 2024 referendum with the same 10 mil increase. And that gets you a little bit more, $282 million in terms of your borrow, again, in 2025, 2026, and 2027. Again, I'll reemphasize here, we're using very conservative assumptions in terms of your assessed value growth, and we're not assuming any type of reassessments along the way. So in reality, I think your capacity would be slightly higher than what we're showing here. But again, these are just for preliminary purposes, for illustration purposes, so you get a sense of what the capacity might be. I will finalize by saying we have a very sophisticated kind of Excel model that models all of these, that we maintain and can update based on different scenarios. And we'll do so as you all work through this process of determining what your needs are to see how we can best finance this. But this gives you a sense of kind of where we would be on broad terms in terms of capacity for these referendums. And those are really the that's the final slide that we have, but would obviously address any questions that you all might have.
Mr. Satterfield?
Yeah, I have a question. This might be for Dr. Ross as well. We're going through a process right now with our stadium, and because of inflation, we've had to make some modifications. Do you all give any advice, or are there any calculations used? Or, I mean, let's say that we decide we needed $200 million in bonds, and let's say that all of a sudden everything improves, gets cheaper, and we doubt that's going to happen. But can adjustments be made to lessen your requirements with regards to bonds, or once you commit, you're committed?
No, sir. The successful referendum authorizes the school district to borrow up to a certain amount.
Right.
It does not require you to borrow all that is approved. I've had one school district one time that did not borrow all that they had approved in a referendum. It was not because of construction cost. It was because they did not buy a piece of property that would have, so that expenditure was unnecessary. One of the reasons to take your time, for the school district to be very methodical in preparing for the referendum, is to get good numbers. It is possible that between now and the fall of 24, things will go up and go down and might level off, and building in early 25 might be better than building in early 24. We don't know. Jay and I help you on the borrowing side. We're not really... don't have too much advice on the spending side, except that there's almost nothing worse than having people expect a product, approve it in a referendum, and y'all not be able to deliver it because of increased cost. So another, as I say, another reason to be very methodical in how you go about preparing for your referendum.
And I'll just add to that, I think in our 5-year master facilities plan, we're going to propose a A&E team that will get us to schematic design. And schematic design brings in a third-party estimator, which will get us better to those realities than I think just kind of looking at square footage. So that is a good point because of the fluctuation you see there in the market.
Scully?
Can you walk us through the process in terms of what does it look like if we approve, the referendum gets approved? We have our plan, we have our set amount, 200 million or whatever it is. How does that look from a processing standpoint? Do we issue all of the full amount of the bonds all at once? I assume that the bank disperses that money into a fund, and then we allocate it as needed as we go through the projects. I'm trying to figure out when do we begin incurring interest on each project, or is it all at once, up front, and then?
Generally, the answer to that is no, particularly with a large building program of this size, 180, 200 million. I think all the scenarios that are in this presentation involve, I think, 2 or 3 separate borrowings. The one, fall 2024, that's still on the, talks about 2 installments of 90 million and a third installment of 102 million. So you borrow the money as you need it for the first 12 months, the second 18 months, and then you finalize the borrowing. Under state law, the proceeds of general obligation debt go to your county treasurer. In this case, it's the Lexington County Treasurer that would be the custodian. You would work with the treasurer probably to have the money invested in the state treasurer's local government pool called LGIP. So it would be earning interest before you spend it, and then the school district would use its normal procedures to request reimbursement from the bond funds held by the county treasurer.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hogan, did you have a question?
Yeah, Ms. Hauser, you'd mentioned earlier that our target mill rate is set at 69.5. How often do you see districts fluctuating their millage rate? Or is it something that's just, is it taboo to even talk about?
No, sir. Nothing taboo about talking about millage. It's a fact of life. I will tell you that since 2006, since Act 388, almost every school district in the state issues at least a small GO bond every year. Because with Act 388 and the limitations on millage increases on your operations side, and the fact that homeowners don't pay operations, so that's the more stressed part of your budget. Beginning in 2007, school districts took capital out of their operating fund. Before then, you might have had, your annual capital, things you do in the summer, your capital maintenance, that could have been in your operations budget. So with the advent of annual borrowings, most school districts try to keep their millage stable. We call it millage stabilization. And there's some movement right now in the legal world about who actually sets your millage. But we know a couple of things. An auditor will not set millage for debt that has not been issued. And historically, y'all have had a very good relationship with your auditors, and they have tended to levy the amount of millage y'all have requested. But again, you request what is needed for debt that's already been issued.
Okay. Second question I've got, I'm looking at the page 9 in yours. So it's actually no, let's look at 11. Follow 24, no tax increase. Obviously that line going across is our millage rate without any increases for us to get 194 million. Red bars are general obligation bonds. Is that the 15 million we're using for deferred maintenance?
I'm going to
Yeah,
ask, Jay, did you hear the question?
I think I heard the question. If I can explain this a little bit more, the gray bars are your existing referendum-approved GO bonds from previous.
Correct.
The yellow bars are the series of 3 financings to fund the Irma High School project. The red bars are your 15 million of annual maintenance. And then the blue bars are the proposed 194 million, in this case, of new referendum debt.
Okay. So I guess, and appreciate the clarity on it, I guess my question leading into that is that in the event this is put on the table and in the event it's passed, would this put the district in a situation to where, in order to utilize 8% money in the future, they would have to raise millage in order to afford to?
No, sir, I don't think so. I think that $15 million is used as a placeholder
Well, yeah, I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to utilizing 8% money for a project.
For
And
another
Of course, we've
project.
got the projects that would be
The,
built into this referendum, and if there was something outside of the referendum that wanted to be put into place, the only method to do that would be 8% or another referendum.
correct.
And based on this graph, it would put it where a millage would have to be increased in
I
order to
think
take
that-
on 8%.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for the clarity.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? All right.
Did y'all have any questions about SCAGO?
I think it's probably good to go over it. Since we have
You've got
four new board
material?
members.
Sure,
Yep.
Sure. So SCAGO was established as a nonprofit in 2002 through largely the activities of school business officials and school superintendents, or the Association of School Administrators. In 2002, 2001, 2002, 2003, we were in a recession, bad economic times. School districts found the state withholding state funds. Just willy-nilly, if the state doesn't have the money, they don't send it. And so a number of school districts were in need of a tax anticipation note. Y'all may have had one early on. You have not needed a TAN in many years. A TAN is a short-term borrowing that helps your cash flow. It gives you cash in the late summer and early fall when you're starting school up, and then the note is repaid in April after your taxes come in. You know, real property taxes are billed in the fall, and they start to come in December, January, and February. So that July, August, September, you might not have funds coming in, and so that's what a tax anticipation note is used for. And that was the first program that SCAGO offered. This year, by this time, there are very few school districts that still need tax anticipation notes. But if, and we hope this is not going to happen, but if there's another 08, 09, we may see school districts needing TANs again. But the bigger program for SCAGO has become the General Obligation Bond Program. In that program, as we said earlier, each district issues its own debt. SCAGO bundles those debts up, they get a credit rating, and they publicly sell that debt to the marketplace. So in y'all's instance, $24 million, instead of being a standalone, you would be part of like a $200 million bond issue. So you'd get the advantage of prorated ratings fees. You'd get the advantage of the lowest interest rate available at that time on that day. All the bond SCAGO issues twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall, but all the debt matures on March the 1st. So again, going back to Act 388, when every school district in the state, or almost every one, started issuing small GO bonds, the SCAGO debt program became very valuable to them, because we've had issuers in for as little as $500,000, and we've had as much as $25 million. So the large and the small school districts can benefit. The other benefit that SCAGO debt program offers isn't relevant to y'all, but to other school districts. A number of other districts issued what we call installment purchase revenue bonds. That was like the Greenville plan. It was a sort of a lease purchase type arrangement for school districts to not have to have a referendum. It was a go around your 8% debt limit. Well, Act 388 ended that program in 2006, but provided that any debt issued before December 31 of 2006, between August and December of that year, they have to use general obligation bonds to make their payments. So the legislature is requiring Newberry, for example, Lexington 1, trying to think who around here, the Lancaster school districts. There are about 20 school districts that had installment purchase revenue bonds. They have to borrow money twice a year in order to make those payments. So that's another reason why this annual program for SCAGO has really become very popular, very cost effective, so long as it's a one-year debt and you can pay everything off on March the 1st. The SCAGO Board of Directors all work in the area of public finance. They are all CFOs, retired CFOs, or school superintendents, and they volunteer, you know, for the betterment of the public school districts in South Carolina. I think we've got page 7 is the map. It'll show you how many school districts have participated. And so if y'all decide to do this again, you would be in the program. Y'all were in, this school district has been in the program for most of the last 10 years. It didn't meet your needs last year because last year your 8% borrowing was a 3-year borrowing. And so the SCAGO program wouldn't have been helpful to you. But prior to that, your CFO was comfortable with SCAGO, and that's how the school district borrowed its annual money. So this would be sort of back to the future, if you will.
Quick question. And this goes back to Mr. Hogan's question, which was a good one. If we borrow that money from SCAGO, then we wouldn't necessarily have to increase the millage because it's a one-year bond. It would mature in a year, and we'd pay that back and have that available.
Correct. And technically, you would actually borrow money through the SCAGO program. You don't actually borrow it from SCAGO. Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan will end up being the holder of the debt. And the recommendation for y'all is to authorize the 24-point-something million to borrow it in this spring and pay it off next March. And there'll probably be a similar recommendation next year, because in March, you would, in the fall, if you're then thinking about a referendum in November of 24, your first borrowing for the referendum would come in 25. So you've got this year and next year for your one-year bonds.
Any more questions?
Just, again, full disclosure, I am counsel of both SCAGO and the school district. There's no conflict. If your interests are met by SCAGO, be in SCAGO. If there are any concerns, we'll do standalone. What we could do, we could send you resolutions that would go either way. Y'all could make the choice, and we could send you a proposed cost of issuance so that you would see what the savings would be one way or the other. For discussion, I guess, on the 27th. I will be virtual with y'all on the 27th, but would be happy to answer any questions. And I think I can be here on the 24th of April.
Mr. Scully?
The model that Mr. Glover referred to earlier, do we have access to that? Ms. Paul, do you have the Excel spreadsheet, the projection model?
Yes,
If
I
not,
do.
okay,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else?
Thank you.
Ms. Paul, is there anything else?
I don't think so. Thank you, Franny. Thank you, Jay. Appreciate y'all's time again today. I think we, really tried to do a broad overview, especially for the new members, to make sure that we covered everything in regards to 8% and bond referendum. So hopefully y'all found this helpful. And again, Franny will be virtual with us on March 27th. And so at March 27th, we will have that first version of the bond resolution for the May issuance. And we will also have our listing of capital projects for that $15 million. So again, those will just be on discussion on March 27th, and then hopefully for approval at the April 24th meeting. But those will go hand in hand. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Heiser. Thank you, Mr. Glover. All right. Did you have Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make the motion that we adjourn.
All right. Do I have a second? Second. All right. So Mr. Hogan's made a motion to adjourn. Any discussion on that? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. We will adjourn, and we will call the meeting back to order to go into executive session at 5:30.